My sister helped my wife cheat on me. Then they teamed up to steal my savings. You know what they say about the opposite of love, right? It's not hate, it's indifference. That last year of my marriage, I lived in a museum of indifference. And guess what? I was the main exhibit. My name's Frank. I'm 55. And this is a story of how I lost everything in one day, only to discover that sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor about what rock bottom really means. Let me paint you a picture of that final year. Our house didn't echo with screaming matches or slammed doors. No dramatic soap opera moments. Just silence. The kind that works like those fancy noise-canceling panels you see in recording studios. Except these were noise-canceling panels for the soul. Karen would come home from work, and we'd move around each other like two ghosts haunting the same property, careful never to occupy the same space at the same time. The weird thing about a dying marriage, it's the small details that kill you, not the big blow-ups. Karen started using the word stability like it was an insult. She'd say it with this little twist in her voice, like she was describing week-old leftovers. Her phone became the sacred object. It used to live everywhere, tossed on counters, forgotten on the couch. Now it lived face down like it was protecting state secrets. And then there was Greg from yoga. I never met Greg from yoga. He existed only as expensive sandalwood cologne on her sweaters, and as a name that came up way too often in conversations that always seemed to end right when I walked into the room. Here's the thing about my sister Brenda and my wife Karen. They'd been best friends since high school, long before I entered the picture. They were a duo, a match set, and I was always just their bass guitarist. You know, necessary for the band, but not exactly the star of the show. When things started getting cold with Karen, I did what any desperate man would do. I tried talking to my sister about it. Big mistake. Brenda had this way of looking at you that made you feel about 3 inches tall. She listened to my concerns about Karen's distance, about the silence, about how I felt like I was losing her. Then she hit me with this gem. She told me that women are fire, and you can't expect fire to keep burning if you keep throwing wet wood on it. Then she asked if maybe the problem was me. That conversation stuck with me, mostly because looking back, I realized she wasn't just on Team Karen. She was the coach, the manager, and the cheerleader. I thought we were all playing the same game, but it turned out they'd handed me a different rule book, one where I was designed to lose from the start. The job loss came on a Tuesday. 30 years with the same company. 30 years of showing up early, staying late, missing my kids' soccer games because quarterly reports don't write themselves. 30 years, and it all ended in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. They gave me the speech about restructuring and market forces and thanked me for my service like I was a soldier coming home from war, instead of a middle-aged guy who just became unemployable in the worst job market since the recession. I drove home in a daze. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. In the passenger seat sat a folder with my 401k information, my retirement fund, everything I'd saved for 3 decades. It wasn't much by Silicon Valley standards, but it was mine. It was supposed to be our safety net, Karen's and mine. Our golden years fund. All I wanted in that moment was to get home and have my wife put her arms around me and tell me we figured it out together. That's what marriage is supposed to be, right? The person who's got your back when the world kicks you in the teeth. I pulled into our driveway around 3 in the afternoon. Karen's car was already there, which was weird because she usually worked until 6. I walked up to the front door, and that's when I saw them. Suitcases, 3 of them, lined up in the entryway like soldiers at attention. My brain couldn't process it at first. Maybe she was going on a business trip, but she'd been working from home for months. Maybe visiting her mother, but she would have mentioned it. Then Karen walked out of the bedroom. She looked right through me. Not at me, through me, like I was a window. She told me she was leaving, just like that. No build-up, no soften the blow. She said she was tired of the predictable boredom. Those were her exact words. Predictable boredom. Like our 28-year marriage was a rerun of a sitcom she'd seen too many times. I stood there holding that folder with my 401k papers, my entire world crumbling in real time. and tried to find words. Any words. But before I could, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a text message preview. Not the full message, just enough to see on a lock screen. It was from Brenda, my sister. The text said, "So did you tell him? Just rip off the Band-Aid. Greg's waiting. You deserve fireworks, not a smoldering candle." You ever have one of those moments where time just stops? Where you can feel your brain try and process information, but it's like a computer that's frozen, and you can see the little spinning wheel of death. That was me, standing in my own living room, looking at proof that my sister had been helping my wife cheat on me. Not just passively knowing about it, actively encouraging it, coaching her through it. I looked up at Karen. She saw that I'd seen the message, and you know what? She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She just shrugged, actually shrugged. Then she told me she couldn't live in this mausoleum of their failed dreams anymore, with me as the main exhibit. Funny thing about that line, she'd clearly practiced it, probably in front of the mirror, probably ran it by Brenda first to make sure it had maximum impact. And it worked. That line hit me harder than the job loss, harder than seeing those suitcases, because it meant she'd been planning this, rehearsing her exit speech while I was working 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat. I wish I could tell you I said something powerful in that moment, some devastating comeback that put her in her place. But the truth is, I just stood there, silent, watching my wife of nearly 3 decades walk out the door with her pre-packed suitcases and drive off to her fireworks with Greg from yoga. The house felt different after she left. Every room screamed betrayal. The kitchen where we'd cooked together. The living room where we'd watched our daughter take her first steps. The bedroom where we'd made plans for retirement. It all felt contaminated now. Poison. I couldn't breathe in there. I made a decision right then. I couldn't stay in that house. Not that night. Not ever again, if I could help it. Every corner held a ghost of what I thought my life was. Every photo on the wall was a lie. Every piece of furniture was a monument to my own stupidity for not seeing this coming. I grabbed one duffel bag and threw in whatever I could reach. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, the 401k folder. I didn't even pack systematically, just grabbed and stuffed. Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, and drove. The nearest Super 8 motel was 15 minutes away. I'd driven past it 1,000 times and never given it a second thought. Now it was going to be home. I checked into room 237, second floor. The place smelled like industrial cleaner failing to cover up decades of bad decisions. The carpet was that special pattern designed to hide stains. The bedspread was burnt orange polyester. There was a painting of a lighthouse on the wall, screwed in so tight you'd need power tools to steal it. The Bible in the nightstand felt less like salvation and more like standard issue for the damned. I sat on the edge of that bed, still holding my duffel bag. The folder with my 401k papers sat next to me. My entire future. 30 years of sacrifice, reduced to a handful of statements in a cheap motel room. Who do you call when your life implodes? My daughter was away at college, living her own life. I couldn't shatter her world with this mess. My parents were gone. Our friends were all couple friends, and I knew how that game worked. They'd already picked Karen's side before I even knew there were sides. So I called no one. The silence in that motel room was different from the silence at home. At home, the silence was hostile, aggressive. Here it was just empty. The kind of emptiness that lets you hear just how broken you really are. I turned off the lights, but kept the TV on. Some late-night infomercial about kitchen knives that could cut through a shoe. The blue glow filled the room. I lay down fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. There was a water stain up there. Kind of looked like a profile of the face. I decided to name it Claudia. My only companion in this new life I hadn't asked for and didn't want. Sleep didn't come that first night. I just lay there, watching infomercials transition into early morning news, listening to the sound of the motel, doors slamming, car engines starting, the couple next door having the kind of fight that makes thin walls feel like tissue paper. Life going on all around me while mine had just stopped. At some point, Exhaustion 1. I passed out with my shoes still on, the TV still playing, and Claudia still watching from the ceiling. When I woke up, there was a moment of confusion. Where was I? Then it all came crashing back. The job, Curran, Brenda, the suitcases, the text message, this room, this new reality. I got up and looked in the mirror above the sink. The guy staring back looked about 100 years old, 55 going on deceased. I looked like the before picture in a depression medication ad. That's the funny thing about hitting rock bottom. It's not a dramatic explosion. It's just quiet. It's you, a water stain named Claudia, and the ice machine humming in the hallway. It's the chilling realization that the life you thought you had was a complete and utter lie. 55 years old. No job. No wife. A sister who betrayed me in the worst way possible. Living in a motel that charged by the week and had a vending machine instead of room service. This was the bottom. And somehow, I had to figure out how to keep breathing when I wasn't even sure I wanted to. Life in purgatory has a routine. You'd think rock bottom would be chaos, but it's actually weirdly structured. Turns out even despair runs on schedule. My days in that Super 8 became a ritual of small humiliations. My head chef was a microwave that had 3 settings: nuclear, slightly less nuclear, and broken. My breakfast was gas station coffee that tasted like regret mixed with motor oil. And my most stable relationship? Still Claudia, the water stain on the ceiling. We had deep conversations every night, and she was an excellent listener. The motel had this smell I can't quite describe. It was part industrial cleaner, part decades of transient lives, and part something that might have been hope once but had gone stale. Every morning I'd wake up to the sound of the ice machine in the hallway, grinding away like it was personally angry at frozen water. The walls were so thin I knew my neighbor in 238 was going through a messy breakup, and the guy in 236 was apparently training for a coughing Olympics. But here's the thing about living in a motel. Nobody asks questions. The clerk at the desk, Travis with the acne, he just gnawed when I paid for another week. Cash. Always cash. There was an unspoken code. We're all here because somewhere else stopped being an option. I spent my days doing what every unemployed 55-year-old does in America. I sent out resumes. Hundreds of them. I applied to positions I was overqualified for, underqualified for, and exactly qualified for. Didn't matter. The response was always the same. Silence, or that special kind of rejection email that thanks you for your interest and wishes you well in your future endeavors. Translation, you're too old, too expensive, or both. You know what the job market is like when you're my age? It's like being invisible. Not in a cool superhero way. In a depressing nobody sees you even when you're standing right their way. These companies post job listings talking about wanting experienced professionals. But what they really mean is they want someone 28 with 15 years of experience and the energy of a teenager on energy drinks. I had one interview. Someplace that sold industrial equipment. The kid interviewing me, and I mean kid because he couldn't have been older than 30, kept calling me sir and looking at my resume like it was a historical document. He actually asked me if I was comfortable with technology. I'd been using computers since before he was born, but apparently my age made me look like I'd be confused by anything more advanced than a typewriter. I didn't get the job. Shocking, right? The 401k money sat in my account like a life raft in the middle of the ocean. Every time I checked the balance, I watched it get smaller. Motel fees, food, gas for my car, which was the only thing I own outright. I did the math one night on the back of a receipt. At my current burn rate, I had maybe 8 months before I'd be completely broke. 8 months to figure out how to become employable again in a world that had decided I was past my expiration date. Fun times. One evening, after getting yet another rejection email, this one from a place I'd applied to 3 times because their website kept glitching, and I thought maybe my application hadn't gone through. Nope. They just really didn't want me. 3 times. I decided I needed to get out of that room before I started having actual conversations with Claudia that she answered back. I drove to the nearest gas station, one of those big ones with 40 pumps and a convenience store the size of a small warehouse. The kind of place that sells everything from beef jerky to fishing licenses. America in a nutshell. I went inside to grab something that vaguely resembled dinner. The fluorescent lights were so bright, they made everything look like a crime scene. I wandered the aisles, throwing random items in a basket. A frozen burrito, some chips, a banana that had seen better days. Living the dream. At the checkout counter, there was a display for Powerball tickets. The jackpot was big, 25 million or something. The number was so large it stopped meaning anything. Just a bunch of zeros that might as well have been asterisks for all the reality they had. The woman behind the counter was watching me with that look cashiers get when they can tell someone's life isn't going great, but they're too tired to care. Her name tag said Debbie. I looked at the Powerball display. Then I looked at my wallet. I had maybe $12 left until I needed to hit an ATM. $12 to last me until I decided to dip into the 401k again. This is going to sound stupid, but in that moment, buying a lottery ticket felt right. Not in a hopeful way, in a surrender way. Like I was standing at the edge of a cliff telling the universe, okay, you win. Here's my last $2. Surprise me. I'm done trying to make rational decisions because rational decisions got me fired, divorced, and living in a motel where the neighbors think 3 a.m. is a great time to rearrange furniture. I told Debbie I wanted a Powerball ticket. Quick pick. I didn't even care about the numbers. She printed it out, I paid, and I shoved in my wallet without looking at it. Walking back to my car, I remember thinking this was officially the lowest point. Not the divorce, not the job loss, but standing in a gas station parking lot at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, having just spent money I couldn't afford on a lottery ticket I'd never win, about to eat a microwave burrito in a motel room while discussing my feelings with a water stain. The American dream, ladies and gentlemen, in all its glory. That night, I ate my sad burrito, watched Claudia, and fell asleep to the sound of my neighbor's TV playing infomercials about copper cookware. Just another day in paradise. The next morning, I woke up and did what I always did. Checked my phone for job responses. Nothing. Checked my email. Spam. Checked the news. Bad. The routine of disappointment was becoming comfortable in a sick way. Then I remembered the lottery ticket. It was Saturday. They draw on Wednesday and Saturday. I pulled out my wallet and found the crumpled ticket stuff behind some receipts. I opened a lottery website on my phone. My internet connection was terrible because the motel Wi-Fi was apparently powered by hamsters on wheels, so the page loaded slow, real slow. One number at a time appeared on the screen. I looked at my ticket, then at the screen, then at my ticket, then at the screen. The numbers matched. All of them. I sat there on the edge of the bed in that dingy motel room, looking at my phone, looking at the ticket, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. This had to be a mistake. I checked 3 more times. Different websites. The official lottery site. A news site. They all said the same numbers. I'd won $25 million. You know what I didn't do? I didn't scream. I didn't jump up and down. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there in total silence, staring at Claudia on the ceiling like she might have some wisdom about this situation. My first thought was Ferrari. My second thought was pure panic. Because here's the thing about suddenly having money when you're at rock bottom. It doesn't feel real. It feels like a mistake that's going to get corrected. Like someone's going to knock on the door and tell you they're sorry, but there was a glitch in the system and you need to give the ticket back. I spent the next hour doing what any paranoid person would do. Research. Frantic, obsessive research. I learned more about lottery law in 60 minutes than I'd learned about anything in years. Texas doesn't have state tax on lottery winnings. First piece of good news. Federal tax is still going to take a massive bite, but it could be worse. I could be in California or New York where they'd tax me twice. Lump sum versus annuity. That was the big question. Take it all at once or get paid over 30 years. I'm 55. I could be dead in 30 years. I could be dead next week. And given how my life was going, taking payments seemed like a great way to let the universe mess with me for 3 more decades. Lump sum after federal taxes came out to about $14.2 million. $14 million. That's not Ferrari money. That's Arsenal money. That's change your entire life money. That's never work again money, if you're smart about it. And for the first time in months, my brain started working again. Really working. Not just the survival mode it had been stuck in, but actually thinking strategically. First thought, don't tell anyone. Not a single person. People who win the lottery and go public end up with problems. Big problems. Family comes out of the woodwork. Friends you haven't talked to since high school suddenly remember they exist. Strangers show up with sob stories and investment opportunities that are definitely not scams. Trust them. I started reading about winners who'd set up trusts to claim anonymously. Texas allows it. Another stroke of luck. I could create a legal entity, have it claim the ticket, and keep my name completely out of it. I spent 2 days holed up in that motel room, barely sleeping, researching everything. I found a lawyer who specialized in this exact situation. Lottery lawyers are apparently a thing. Who knew? Set up a consultation. Paid his retainer in cash from what was left of my 401k. His name was Davis. Nice office downtown. The kind with actual artwork on the walls and coffee that didn't taste like punishment. He took one look at me and my crumpled lottery ticket and got to work. 3 weeks later, I had a trust. Blue Horizon Trust. I liked the name. Sounded optimistic. Forward-looking. Nothing like a guy living in a Super 8 eating microwave burritos and talking to ceiling stains. The trust claimed the ticket. The money hit the trust account. Then it hit my account. $14.2 million. I checked my banking app about 50 times that first day, convinced it would disappear. But it stayed there. All those zeros. Just sitting there, mocking my frozen burritos. And here's what I didn't do. I didn't change a thing. Not one thing. I kept living in the Super 8. Kept driving my 12-year-old sedan. Kept microwaving sad dinners. Kept sending out resumes, even though I didn't need a job anymore. Why? Because the moment I changed anything, people would notice. And I wasn't ready for people to notice. Especially not Karen and Brenda. See, I've been doing some thinking during those research sessions. A lot of thinking. About that text message. About how they'd tag-teamed me. About how my sister had helped my wife cheat, and then they both walked away like I was yesterday's trash. And I realized something. They thought I was broke, desperate, vulnerable. That 401k was the only thing I had left, and they knew it. Months went by. For months of living like a broke divorced guy in a motel while sitting on $14 million. It was almost funny. Almost. I'd go to the same gas station, buy the same terrible coffee, chat with Debbie who always looked concerned about my life choices. The disguise of poverty is powerful. Nobody suspects a guy paying for a motel room week by week in cash has enough money to buy the entire motel chain. Then one day my phone rang. Number I hadn't seen in months. Brenda. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Her voice came through all sugar and fake concern. She'd heard through the grapevine, she said, that I was having a tough time. She felt just terrible about how things had gone down. Families shouldn't let families suffer alone. She wanted to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner at her place. Just her husband, and their daughter Ashley. No drama. No pressure. Just family. I listened to every word while watching traffic go by outside my motel window. And I thought about nature documentaries. The kind where predators circle wounded prey. They don't attack when you're strong. They wait. They watch for signs of weakness. For blood in the water. That's what this was. They'd given me time to burn through my savings. Time to get desperate. Time to become the kind of desperate that makes terrible decisions. And now they were circling, ready to pick my bones clean. She kept talking. Mentioned how Ashley was struggling with college tuition. How expensive education had become. How family helps family. The subtext was so obvious it might as well have been skywriting. I thought about that 401k they wanted. That safety net they planned to tear apart like piranhas. I thought about Karen and her new life with Greg and his sandalwood cologne. I thought about Brenda coaching her through the affair, cheering her on, treating my marriage like it was some kind of obstacle to overcome. And I smiled, actually smiled, First genuine smile in months. Because they thought they were hunting wounded prey. They thought I was weak, desperate, and ready to be manipulated. They had no idea that the wounded animal they were stalking had grown teeth, sharp ones. I told Brenda I'd love to come to Thanksgiving. My voice was perfect, tired, defeated, grateful that someone still cared. I even threw in a bit about how lonely the holidays are when you're going through tough times. She ate it up. I could practically hear her grinning through the phone. She told me to come around 2 p.m. Bring nothing but myself. They'd take care of everything. After I hung up, I stood at that motel window for a long time. The sun was setting. The parking lot was half empty. Somewhere down the row, someone was fighting with their door lock. Normal sound of a normal evening in a place where nothing special ever happens. But something had shifted. I wasn't the same guy who checked into room 237 all those months ago. That guy was broken, defeated, ready to give up. This guy had $14 million and a plan. This guy had been playing dead while his enemies got comfortable, while they planned their attack, while they convinced themselves the game was already won. They wanted to circle the wounded prey? Fine. Let them circle. Let them get close. Let them think they had me right where they wanted me. They had no idea they were walking into a trap, and I had no intention of warning them. I looked up at Claudia one last time that evening, my faithful companion through the worst months of my life. I swear she looked different somehow. Proud, maybe, or maybe I was just projecting. Either way, the game was on, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I wasn't the one playing defense. I was done being prey. Time to see how they like being hunted. Thanksgiving Day arrived with that crisp November air that makes you think about football and family and all the Norman Rockwell paintings that pretend everyone's life is perfect. I drove to Brenda's house in my beat-up sedan, wearing clothes I'd owned for a decade, looking every bit the part of a man who'd lost everything. Method acting at its finest. Brenda lived in one of those suburban neighborhoods where every house looks like it was designed by the same architect who ran out of ideas after the third model. Her place was the one with the perfectly manicured lawn and the wreaths on the door that screamed we have our lives together. I pulled into the driveway, and there it was, Karen's car, a newer model than mine, because of course it was. She'd been living her best life with Greg, while I'd been supposedly scraping by. The sight of it should have made me angry. Instead, I felt nothing. No pain, no rage, just the cold curiosity of an entomologist studying insects under glass. I walked up to the door, rang the bell, heard footsteps inside. The door opened, and there was Brenda with her huge fake smile and her arms spread wide like we were in some heartwarming holiday commercial. She hugged me. I hugged back. The whole thing felt like a performance, which made sense because that's exactly what it was. Inside, the house smelled like turkey and stuffing and lies. Karen was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, looking comfortable. Too comfortable. She glanced up when I walked in and gave me this little smile that was probably supposed to look sympathetic, but came across more like a cat that just spotted a mouse with a broken leg. Brenda's husband, Tom, shook my hand and immediately made himself scarce. Smart man. He could sense the predator energy in the room and wanted no part of it. Their daughter Ashley was upstairs, conveniently absent from the opening act of this little drama. We sat down for dinner. The table was set like something out of a magazine. China, I'm pretty sure Brenda only used once a year. Cloth napkins. The good silverware. All this effort to make everything look civilized while they prepared to pick my bones clean. The conversation started safe. Weather, traffic, the usual small talk people make when they're circling around what they really want to talk about. Brenda asked how I was doing, her voice dripping with concern that was about as genuine as a $3 bill. I played my part, told them about the job search, made it sound rough, which wasn't hard because it had been rough, mentioned the motel, let a little crack show in my voice. Just enough to make them think I was barely holding it together. I watched their faces, watched them exchange glances, watched the predator instincts kick in as they smelled blood in the water. Then Brenda made her move. She brought up Ashley. Casually, so casually, mentioned how she was doing great at college, but the tuition was absolutely killing them. Student loans are just devastating these days, she said. The debt these kids graduate with is criminal. She sighed, one of those performative sighs that's meant to communicate burden and struggle. Then she looked at me with these big, concerned eyes and said family should help family when times are tough. That's what family does. The setup was so obvious, I almost laughed. But I kept my face neutral. Tired. Beat down. Exactly what they expected to see. Karen jumped in then. Her voice had that edge to it, that mix of fake sweetness and barely concealed threat she perfected over the years. She said she knew I wasn't stupid. She knew I hadn't blown through all my 401k. That money was my life's work, and surely I'd been smart enough to hold on to most of it. Then came the pitch. If I help with Ashley's tuition now, she'd be more flexible during the divorce proceedings, more understanding about the house, about alimony. She actually used the word investment, called it an investment in my peaceful future, like she was doing me a favor by offering not to destroy me completely in court if I just handed over my retirement fund. We're not strangers, she said. We're family. The audacity was breathtaking. The sheer nerve of sitting there at Thanksgiving dinner, using my niece's education as leverage to extort money from me after everything they'd done. It was almost impressive in its cruelty. I looked down at my plate, let the silence stretch out. Let them think I was struggling with a decision. Let them believe they had me cornered. There's an old saying, fear the man who has nothing left to lose. They'd made a crucial mistake. They thought I had something left to lose. They thought that 401k was my lifeline, my last grip on stability. And if they could just get their hands on it, they'd win. But the Frank they thought they were manipulating, he died in that motel room months ago. I rubbed my face with my hands, let out a long, tired breath. When I looked up, I made sure my eyes looked defeated, worn down, like a man who'd finally given up the fight. I told them they'd won. My voice was flat, exhausted. I said yes, I still had most of the 401k. I'd been careful with it, because it was all I had left, but I didn't want to fight anymore. I was tired of fighting. I could see the triumph flash across their faces. Quick, unmistakable, like sharks spotting wounded prey. Then I suggested we make it official. Meet at my lawyer's office next week and draw up the paperwork properly. That way there'd be no confusion later. No, he said, no room for future disputes. Everything clean and legal. Karen practically purred. She loved the idea, said it was mature of me, responsible. Brenda nodded along, already calculating her cut in her head. I watched them exchange a look across the table. Pure triumph. They thought they'd just successfully herded a sheep into a pen. They had no idea the sheep was leading them to a slaughterhouse. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of fake pleasantries and barely contained excitement on their part. They were so focused on their victory, they didn't notice I was studying them. Every gesture, every look, every word, like a scientist documenting behavior before the experiment ends. When I left that night, they walked me to the door with smiles that didn't reach their eyes, told me to drive safe, to take care of myself. Karen even touched my arm and said everything would work out for the best. I drove back to the motel in silence. The streets were empty. Most people were home with their families, sleeping off turkey and pie, maybe watching football highlights or arguing about politics. Normal Thanksgiving stuff. I parked in my usual spot at the Super 8, walked up to room 237, closed the door behind me, and finally I let myself smile. Not a happy smile. Something colder, more calculated. The smile of someone who just watched their enemies walk willingly into a trap and couldn't wait to see the look on their faces when it snapped shut. I looked up at Claudia on the ceiling, my faithful companion through all of this. Soon I'd be saying goodbye to her and this room and this whole chapter of my life. But not yet, not until the trap was sprung. The week passed slowly. I spent it preparing, going over details with Davis, making sure every piece was in place, every document dated correctly, every signature where it needed to be. This wasn't something we could afford to mess up. Davis was good at his job. Meticulous. He understood what we were doing and why, and he seemed to take a certain professional satisfaction in the elegance of it. There's a special kind of lawyer who appreciates a well-executed legal maneuver the way an artist appreciates a perfectly composed painting. The day of the meeting arrived. I put on the same tired clothes I'd been wearing, drove to Davis's office in my beat-up car, parked in the garage, and took the elevator up. His office was everything the Super 8 wasn't. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of downtown, real art on the walls, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, and coffee. Real coffee that smelled like it came from beans that had been personally selected by someone with a degree in coffee science. I sat down in one of his chairs. Leather. Actual leather, not the plastic stuff pretending to be leather. For the first time in months, I felt like I was back in civilization. Davis brought me the coffee in a real mug, not styrofoam, not paper. Ceramic with the law firm's logo. Small details, but they mattered. They were reminders that there was a world beyond motel rooms and microwave dinners. Karen and Brenda arrived 15 minutes late. Fashionably late, they probably thought. They walked in like they owned the place, dressed to kill, radiating confidence. Karen had on heels that clicked on the hardwood floor. Brenda wore a power suit. They looked like they were heading to brunch after this, ready to celebrate their victory. Davis greeted them with professional courtesy, offered coffee, which they declined, too eager to get to business, too focused on the prize they thought they were about to claim. We all sat down. The conference table was massive, polished with that reflected the overhead lights. Davis sat at the head. I sat on one side. They sat on the other, like a negotiation, like a business deal. Except this wasn't a negotiation. This was an execution. Davis opened a folder, pulled out a document, placed it on the table in front of Karen. He explained it in that calm, professional voice lawyers use. Said that to expedite the divorce proceedings and avoid unnecessary costs and complications, I was willing to agree to her terms regarding the house. I'd sign over my share, give her the whole thing. No fight, no contest. Karen's eyes lit up. The whole house. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected to have to fight for it, to use the 401k as leverage. But here I was, just handing it over. There was one condition, Davis continued. She needed to sign a full and final settlement agreement. No future claims. No coming back later for more. This document would confirm that all financial matters between us were resolved. Past, present, and future. Karen barely glanced at the document. She was too busy mentally redecorating the house, probably already thinking about moving Greg in, making it theirs instead of ours. Brenda leaned over, skimmed it, nodded approvingly. It all looked standard. Normal divorce stuff. Nothing suspicious. Karen signed. Her signature was quick, confident. The signature of someone who thought they'd just won the lottery. In a way, I guess they had. Just not the way they thought. Davis notarized it right there. Made it official. Congratulated Karen on the finalization of her divorce. Told her she and I were now financially independent parties with no further obligations to each other. Karen smiled. Actually smiled. She looked at me like I was a problem she'd finally solved. A chapter she was closing. Old news. Then Davis paused. Reached into his folder again. Pulled out another document. The room's energy shifted. Subtle. Like a change in air pressure before a storm. He said he had one more matter to address. Placed a second document on the table where everyone could see it. It was a copy of a lottery claim form, filed with the state of Texas. Blue Horizon Trust claiming a Powerball jackpot, $25 million, 14.2 after taxes. The date on the form was clearly visible. Filed 2 days after the divorce was finalized, 2 days after Karen and I were no longer legally married. Davis explained, in that same calm professional voice, that since I had claimed the lottery winnings after the marriage was officially dissolved, the winnings were not and never would be considered marital property. They were mine, solely and completely mine. I watched their faces. It was like watching a time lapse of a building being demolished. First confusion, their brains trying to process what they were hearing, then understanding as the words started to make sense, then shock as the full implications hit, and finally, rage. Pure, impotent, beautiful rage. Karen's face went white, then red, then white again. She looked like someone had slapped her with a frozen fish. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Brenda found her voice first, started sputtering something about fraud, about hiding assets, about this not being legal. Her voice kept getting higher and shriller, like a kettle reaching boiling point. Davis shut that down immediately, explained that everything was completely legal. The lottery ticket had been purchased after the separation. The claim was filed after the divorce was final. There was no hiding of marital assets because at the time the asset was acquired, there was no marriage. Karen finally managed to speak, asked how long I'd known, how long I'd been sitting on this. I stood up, slowly, took my time, let them sit there marinating in their realization. I looked at them, really looked at them. For the first time since this whole thing started, I looked them straight in the eyes, and I told them the truth. Said the funny thing was, I might have actually helped with Ashley's tuition, if they'd just asked, if they'd approached me like family instead of like con artists running a scam. But they'd chosen manipulation, blackmail. They'd weaponized my niece's education to try to rob me. I looked at Brenda, told her she'd helped destroy my family because she thought I was boring, because stable wasn't exciting enough, because she'd rather be Karen's cheerleader than her brother's sister. I looked at Karen, told her she'd tried to rob a man she'd promised a love in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. Well, here was the poorer part she'd signed up for. Hope she enjoyed it. Then I mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that I'd heard property taxes in their neighborhood were about to go up significantly. Something about a new school district assessment. Probably nothing to worry about, just something I'd heard. I told them to enjoy the house. All of it. Every square foot of mortgage and maintenance and memories that were now completely their problem. Then I said I had to go. Had a flight to catch. Fiji, first class. Window seat. I picked up my copy of the settlement agreement, tucked it under my arm, walked to the door of that conference room. Without looking back, behind me, I could hear Karen starting to cry. Angry tears. Frustrated tears. The sound of someone realizing they'd lost everything while thinking they'd won. I didn't turn around. Didn't gloat. Didn't say another word. I walked out of Davis's office, through the reception area with its expensive furniture and its assistant who definitely knew what had just happened based on the sounds coming from the conference room, down the elevator, through the lobby, out onto the street. The sun was shining. One of those perfect autumn days with sky is impossibly blue and the air is crisp and everything feels sharp and clear and real. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment. People walked past. Cars drove by. The city moved around me like I was a rock in a stream. Somewhere behind me, up in that glass tower, two women were sitting in a conference room realizing that their prey had been a predator all along, that their trap had been a trap for them, that the game they thought they'd won had been rigged from the start. I got in my car, started the engine, pulled out into traffic. I didn't go back to the Super 8. Didn't need to. I'd already checked out that morning. Said goodbye to Claudia. Thanked her for her companionship, left Travis a $100 tip, and told him to take care of himself. I drove to the airport, returned my rental, walked into the terminal with nothing but a small bag and a cashier's check for $14 million in my pocket. At the gate, I bought a coffee. Real coffee. From one of those airport places that charges $8 because they can. I didn't care. I could afford it. I sat there waiting for my flight, drinking overpriced coffee, watching people rush by with their own problems and their own lives, and I thought about how strange life is. 6 months ago, I'd lost everything. Job, wife, sister, home, dignity. I'd been at the absolute bottom with nowhere to go but down further. And now I was sitting in an airport waiting to fly first class to Fiji with enough money to never work again. The universe has a weird sense of humor. They called my flight. I walked down the jet bridge, found my seat, 3A window, just like I'd said. As the plane took off, I looked out at the city, getting smaller below me. Somewhere down there, Karen was stuck with a house she couldn't afford and a divorce settlement that gave her nothing. Somewhere down there, Brenda was explaining to her husband how they'd just lost their chance at a family windfall. Somewhere down there, Greg from yoga was probably wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. And up here, I was free. The flight attendant came by with champagne. I took a glass, held it up to the window. To Claudia, I thought, to rock bottom, to the universe and its twisted sense of humor, to the moment when the prey becomes a predator, and to the sweet, sweet satisfaction of watching your enemies realize they played themselves. I drank the champagne. It tasted like victory.